Hey, I'm Tim from Circuitous Effects, and you're watching Defining Circuit. Defining Circuit is a periodic interview series where I chat with fellow creators in the music world about what inspired and defined their passion for building. The moments, ideas, experiences, and even the circuit that sparked their drive to create for musicians. On this episode, I'm joined by Jamie Muir from Super Cool Pedals. Jamie, thanks for taking time out of your day to chat.
Hey, no problem. Thanks so much for having me, Tim.
Well, hey, let's start with you telling me about yourself and how you got into making pedals.
Sure. Well, yeah, I am Jamie from Super Cool Pedals. Really, the first pedal that I built and sold to someone was in around 2019, so that's kind of how I count things. But realistically, it was a much longer journey to kind of get to building pedals from there. So really, I got into pedal building because I was a broke ass musician and needed to learn how to fix and repair my gear.
Yeah.
So for decades, I just used whatever gear I could have. I'm a guitarist, so I spent all my money on my guitars and realistically had very little money left over for anything else, right?
Yeah.
So I had a Fender Reverb Deluxe for ages that the tubes would break down. I'd plug in a Dirty Power or generator shows, stuff like that. Had to learn how to fix those up. Pedals, not so much, believe it or not. I wasn't much of a pedal guy for a long time because, I just had my Big Muff and my amp, and that was it. That's
Yeah,
all I
well,
really
that's
needed,
great.
and a Boss multi effects unit, the Boss ME50,
Nice.
which I still think is an underrated multi effects pedal.
Yeah.
Um, but I've always been into fixing and building things. I was a woodworker in a past life, and
Hmm.
eventually I started playing organs in a rock band like
Okay.
20 years ago.
Wow.
And I started finding, I fell in love with old transistor organs, old Farfisas and Vox organs, right?
Hmm.
And I'd find them for, this is when nobody cared about this stuff either, 20
Yeah.
years ago. So, I'd find them off of Craigslist or whatever it was for like $150, and they'd
Hmm.
just be broken in people's basements, like, I don't know, this was my grandpa's or my dad's or whatever. And it'd just be covered in dust and moldy and just like a big mess. So I started, and again, I was a broke ass musician. I couldn't afford to buy really good gear or like a Nord that had modeling capabilities. So it was
Hmm.
like, well, if I want a Farfisa, I got to buy a Farfisa. So I'd buy these broken things and take them apart and start learning how to look at schematics and, desoldering transistors and
Hmm.
capacitors, and all those old capacitors were always
Yeah.
dried out. So,
Yeah.
from there, it took me into tape. I fell in love with tape machines, but again, another dying technology that stuff always needs repairs. So learning how to take tape machines apart and retracing boards and blah blah blah. And eventually, really the first pedal I built was kind of a tape machine.
Okay.
So I was working on tape machines at the time, and failing a lot of the time, by the way, too. I don't have an electrical engineer brain. I have a
Hmm.
like doing stuff brain and a
Yeah.
maker's brain.
Oh, yeah.
So I could take stuff apart and put it back together, but sometimes the repairs I did along the way just didn't take either. But in this particular case, I had stumbled across this Marantz tape machine. It was a 3-head cassette tape machine because I was really into recording onto cassettes at the time. And I came across this tape machine, and just, I think it was on a subreddit or something like that. Someone had turned one of these 3-head tape machines into a delay,
Hmm.
like a Space Echo
Yeah.
like delay just out of this cassette. And I was like, that's really cool. I want to do that. So I started looking into how to do it. And it required basically making like a preamp, like at a PCB that had a loop in, out, and
Hmm.
amplifier and this kind of thing. So you kind of fed the tape machine back into itself, but it required this board and this circuit. And I think it came from this really, really old book that I had to like track down on the internet and like actually order a physical copy of. I don't remember the name of it offhand. It was by Tim something, and it was one of the. It was not electronics for artists. It predates that book
Okay.
too. But anyway, I found basically it had the layout of this PCB, and you had to do what's called a toner transfer
Yeah.
onto PCB material. So basically, you can get a raw PCB that just has copper on the top, and you iron on this design of the PCB, and then you put it in a bath of acid
Uh,
to etch
yeah.
all of the copper away, and you end up with this, raw trace. And then you have to take a Dremel and drill all your holes for your components and blah, blah, blah. So this was the first time, I was like, cool, this seems like a really great arts and crafts project, just let's see what I can do. So I etched the board, I drilled it. I found a local shop in Toronto at the time where I lived that had capacitors and resistors, and I went in and bought everything that I needed and soldered it together. And it was just a big spaghetti wire mess of things because I really just had no barometer of what I was doing at this point. And of course it didn't work. It just didn't work. And I was like, cool. So not only am I not normally the best at diagnosing what a problem is on a tape machine or a PCB or anything like that in general, now I've just made one from scratch and I still don't know what's wrong or how to diagnose this.
Right.
And it sucked. But at the same time, I was like, all right, well, in for a penny, in for a pound, right? I've gone this far with it. Let me learn how to actually diagnose these problems. So took out the multimeter that I usually just use to check continuity and learned how to measure voltage, and then learn about integrated circuits and what bias voltage is and how to check that. And slowly but surely started to figure out what was going wrong with this circuit just by diagnosing it and using audio probes and all this stuff. And frankly, that was one of the most invaluable experiences I've ever had, because instead of just passively trying to fix things, failing, and then just putting it in a pile and move on to the next thing, I really sat down and was invested in getting this thing to work. So after a couple of weeks on and off of really tinkering around, and I remember this really, really vividly because there was a awful blizzard happening in Toronto at the time. And I was on my lunch break from my day job or something like that. And I was at home and I was like, I think I got it. I think I know exactly what's wrong with this. Just soldering away and making a big mess of things. And I remember plugging in this spaghetti monster mess of a PCB into the tape machine and just getting this glorious delay sound, this bing, 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 that awesome analog tape echo sound. And it was just this, the lights went off in my brain, amazing. And it was the biggest dopamine hit I've ever received. And in that exact moment, the guitar that I was using to demo, the guitar strap broke and it fell square onto my big toe and just smashed it open. And so this brilliant moment of being absolutely elated that after a month of work, I finally got this circuit to work and I felt like a genius. My guitar attacked the shit out of me. And now I had this big bloody mess of a situation to deal with. It was not good. It was a big gory mess. Blah. And I looked down and I was like, but I really want to play with the circuit. And I was like, but I had this situation to deal with. So I kind of just wrapped up my foot and then went back to the circuit and was trying to enjoy it before I was like, I have to go to the hospital. I have to go deal with this. So in the middle of a blizzard, I couldn't drive or do anything because this blizzard was a mess. I had to hobble over to a walk-in clinic nearby in my neighborhood with my foot just wrapped in a towel. And I was so mad because I wanted to just enjoy the moment of finally succeeding with this, delay circuit. So anyway, dealt with all that. My toe was broken and smashed and all the hell and everything. When I finally got home that evening, I went back to the circuit and played through it and really enjoyed it. And I'll always remember that for many
reasons to remember that day now.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was really the first circuit I think that made me go holy shit, I can make this stuff. Instead of, and it started to help me wrap my mind around the process of, how a circuit works, and really helped to kick things off for Super Cool. So that was probably 2016, something like that.
That's great. Let me ask you, from the moment that you went into learning this, you mentioned Reddit being a resource. You mentioned this book that you found that allowed you to create this circuit. What are some other resources that were around that allowed you to go from that maker's brain into sort of a more engineer's brain? Something I think a lot of us at least have to deal with as we think this profession, or at least this hobby, is a really cool thing to do, but we don't quite know how to wrap our head around it. What are some resources that you found that helped you get to that point of a working tape delay?
I mean, I wish I could say like friends and peers, but I always have a little bit of anxiety with knowing what I'm talking about. So
Mm,
there's a couple people that I would like ask questions. Like one of my best friends who is infinitely smarter than me, I'd ask him a question and he'd be like, yeah, it's a ladder of resistance. That's the problem. And I'd go, uh-huh, okay, cool. And I'd walk away being like, fuck, I don't know what that is. Like, I don't want to let him know that I'm really that much of an idiot. So Reddit honestly was one of the
yeah.
biggest resources for me. Either searching up old posts on the DIY pedals subreddit or
Mm,
the Ask Electronics. Like, I think one of the biggest lessons that I've learned through all this as well is I'm not the first person to have this question, and I'm not
yeah.
the first person to run into this issue. So more often than not, I can find somebody else who's gone through this same thing before and has the same, minimal level of knowledge as me. And it
Yeah.
really helps me to be a little bit easier on myself and understand that like learning is a process, but overall Reddit has been one of the best places for me. So after a while I started becoming a little bit more involved in the DIY pedals subreddit
Okay.
and posting my circuits from the beginning to end and getting
Yeah.
help from that community. So what's been the most helpful to me is actually doing my own thing, making the mistake, and then
Mm.
trying to figure out what the mistake was.
So that was 2016, right? That the tape delay came to be,
Yeah.
and the broken toe. Um,
Uh-huh.
and then you said 2019 was the launching point for Super Cool Pedals. And now I'd say that you're in the medium pedal company zone, right? So what are some
Sure.
things
Yeah.
that led from that moment of the tape delay to 2019 to coming up, not just with a pedal company, but a pedal company that has a pretty distinct aesthetic approach as well? Something that I think most people in this world would recognize just by looking at your pedals.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Well, like I say 2019 because that was the first time I sold a pedal to a non-friend.
Okay.
So for a while I was just sort of posting on Facebook when Facebook was, still a thing,
Yeah.
like active gear groups and just kind of introducing myself and saying, "Hey, I build these pedals, I built a batch of these 6, pedals and, would sell those around locally and things like that."
Mm.
And I think it was my second pedal design, the 77 Fuzz Blender,
Mhm.
which was actually the second like pedal that I built and sold,
Yeah.
where I kind of developed this aesthetic that I've stuck to. Before that, it was really minimal design stuff. I was using stick figures, literally
Mm.
stick figures on my pedals. I've kind of just always had this obsession with like commercial art, and I've had a pack of camels sitting on my desk here, for 20 years sealed, and it's kind of my totem. And I always loved pop art, Andy Warhol, and just kind of the repurposing of designs and things like that.
Mm.
So I was like, yeah, maybe I kind of just want to do something different with the design of this. The pack of camels kind of was literally staring right at me, and I was like, okay, cool, let's work with
Yeah.
that, and kind of
Yeah.
did a redesign and this and that. And then immediately I posted, I think that went on Reddit, and people were like knocking my door down. And I think I kind of realized there, I was like, yeah, you know what? Like, I do think the circuitry is one thing. And I think you can make the best light mid gain overdrive that money can buy. But if you just
Mm.
put it in a blank box, it doesn't really look good. I just kind of decided from that point on that I wanted to make the art, the design, and the circuits all as sort of like synergistic as
Cool.
possible. It's got to look
Yeah.
like it sounds. It's got to sound like it looks.
Yeah. Take me through the moment when you decided that this was going to be a thing, like Super Cool Pedals was going to be a company, that you needed to go through all of the processes, be it getting your company name set up and whatever.
Yeah.
What was that decision like?
It was never really a decision, if I'm going to be honest. Everything just happened really organically.
Hmm.
And I do often have people ask me for advice for starting a pedal company, and my advice is don't. And not to be like, oh no, it's crappy and it's a miserable time, like whatever. I'll let the boomer nihilists do that whole thing. For me, it's just like you just have to start doing it and enjoy the hobby first, and kind of let fate decide and let the market decide. If people like what you're doing and they want to pay you money for it, great, take the money, keep building and doing it. And that's really what happened for me. It was more so than making it my full-time job. The thing that made me the most proud with Super Cool Pedals is when I realized that Super Cool Pedals was paying for itself. So it was no longer me spending $1,000 on parts and then making pedals and, enjoying them. It was like, oh shit, I sold enough of those pedals that I can build more pedals and it's not costing me money anymore. So it was really just like a hobby, and I was selling them on the side just to keep the hobby alive. And then things progressed. Like I had 1 year where I was like, oh no, I made, a few $1,000s. Like, what do I do with this? Do I hide it from the government, or okay, I guess I got to get a business number now, and like just all of that stuff just came just purely out of necessity, and my motto is just, I'll deal with it when I have to, and I'll grow organically. And then one day, if all of a sudden the growth stops, that either means I've made it or I've failed in a wondrous and exciting way.
Oh, that's an incredible way to look at it. I love it. So I've been loving the videos you've been putting out recently where you're going through each pedal in your line and sort of stacking them up and doing some things like that. That's been really fun. What's in the future for Super Cool? Is it to keep supporting that line that you have, or do you have some new things coming out?
So, I mean, I've always thought of these specific pedals as like the Vice series. So both a very specific design aesthetic that means something to me that, means something to other people, hopefully along the way. And the circuits too are like, I've literally been building my own pedal board. So it's usually the impetus to building a pedal is because I want that pedal on my board, or it already is. And it's like, cool, well, I need like a always on overdrive. Done. I got to build it. Man, I need a chorus. Okay, I'll build it.
Yeah.
But I'm getting to the point now where I have had some more original circuits that I haven't released because just philosophically, it's like, I would like Super Cool to be a little bit bigger before I get to some of the more crazy stuff. But I can promise I do have 2 other pedals in the pipeline right now that are going to get released within the next 2 months. Actually, that I'm really, really excited about.
Well, thank you again for speaking with me today, Jamie. This has been great.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks so much for having me, Tim. This has been a pleasure. I hope I haven't yammered on too much.
No, it was awesome. Well, thanks everyone for watching. If you enjoyed this conversation, stick around. More interviews are on the way where I'll keep exploring all the things that define why we do what we do. It's been a pleasure, Jamie.
Thanks so much, Tim.